Well, this morning, as I mentioned, the first Sunday in Lent. Lent is the 40 days and nights between Ash Wednesday and Easter. It's a special time of discipline and prayer, spiritual practice for Christians. There have been times, I think, when the Christian church has taken this less seriously and times when we take it more seriously. And what I observe in today's society is really a huge interest and return to some of what we might even call some of these ancient and even archaic practices. And I think they're really important. They're more important to me now than they ever have been. So we're going to be talking about them today. Ordinarily, we would be reading about the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert, being tempted by Satan right after the baptism of Jesus. On this particular day, I'm going to reference it at the last. But I want to use another text this morning. It comes from Mark, the first chapter. And you'll see that in the Gospel of Mark, the busyness of the life of Jesus, the ministry began right away, because here we are in the 32nd chapter of the 32nd verse of the first chapter. That evening at sundown, they brought to him, that is, they brought to Jesus, all who were sick or possessed with demons. And the whole city was gathered around the door. Pay attention to this statement. The whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit them to speak because they knew him. And then in the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The other night I was watching the news, and there were a lot of people around. My grandkids were there and so forth, so it was busy, and I wasn't paying much attention. But all of a sudden, a segment came on featuring a congressman by the name of Tim Ryan. Now, this is not Paul Ryan, the former vice presidential candidate. This is Tim Ryan, the congressman from Ohio. And it got my attention because it showed him, the opening part of this particular TV segment, showed him in his living room getting ready to meditate for 30 minutes. And that's the way he starts his day every single day. United States congressman. And then it went on to talk about one of his passions, which is what is called SEL, social and emotional learning. He's pushing this for the school systems in the state of Ohio. Social and emotional learning is a way of augmenting the regular learning that takes place in public schools by teaching children to develop emotionally and socially in really positive ways. And it incorporates the practice of what sometimes is called mindfulness, including the practice of meditation. And they went to a school there in Ohio. It showed Congressman Ryan there with the other children. They were all lined up, they were sitting, and they were meditating. And then there was a segment with a little girl, I would say a third grader, and they were asking her how the meditation had helped her. And she said, well, it has helped with the anger. And they said, what do you mean? And this little girl, she said, I live in a very angry neighborhood where there's a lot of violence. And since everybody has started meditating, there's less anger and there's less violence. And then they quoted the statistics on this particular program, the social emotional learning, how the reading scores, I think, have doubled. Math scores have increased. The efficacy of this effort was really pretty interesting. And then the segment closed with a final interview with Congressman Ryan. And they said, Congressman Ryan, all this stuff about meditation and so forth, who do you think could use this the most? And he said, the members of the United States Congress. Of course. Of course. The interview closed with him making kind of a pitch for meditation and social emotional learning. And then the last words he said were these. He said, after all, how much faster can we go? That really caught my attention. How much faster can we go? I got to thinking about that and applying it to my own life. This past week, there was a moment when I was sitting there at my email. I have 2 professional email accounts, and I was working on my email. And there came a moment when I had answered all my email. There was no more email to be responded to. And I was so excited that I literally got up and ran down the hallway and told Mary Harris, guess what? I'm caught up on my email. Because it was quite literally the first time in 18 months that I was caught up on my email. It didn't last long. But I mean, that question, how much faster can we go? As a lot of you know, because I refer to it now and then, I've had a BlackBerry for years, and I finally decided, I thought that it was the expectation of the congregation that I be at least as technologically advanced and cool as Bart Smith. So I now have an iPhone. I have an iPhone, and I like it because I can just tell it what to do rather than trying to type in things. But I started thinking about this. How much faster can we go? My iPhone, it's like a little computer, as you know, and it is with me literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are only 3 hours out of the week that my iPhone is not with me. Guess which 3 hours that is? These 3 hours. I try to remember to leave it in there so it won't go off while I'm preaching. And I started thinking about this issue. How much faster can we go? When I go to sleep at night, I keep my iPhone with me on the nightstand. I plug it in to a charger and keep it with me on my nightstand. I'm a light sleeper. If I get a text message in the middle of the night, I probably will awaken and answer it. It is not at all unusual for me to send my last email of the night at 10:30 in the evening and my first email of the morning at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I ask you, how much faster can we go? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I don't know why I started thinking about this, but I started thinking about tachometers for some reason. When I was a kid growing up in Denison, Texas, some of my friends were mechanically gifted. I was not. And people would race their automobiles. And some of my friends that knew how to do this would install tachometers in their automobiles. Now, tachometer is different from a speedometer. A speedometer measures how fast your automobile is actually going. A tachometer measures how many revolutions per minute the crankshaft is going. So back in those days, it was unusual to have a tachometer. These days, I suspect that every one of you have a tachometer in your car, an instrument cluster. It's the other big dial. I know you don't pay any attention to either of these dials, but you've got two big dials. One is the speedometer, it tells you whether or not you're going over the speed limit. And the other is the big dial, it's the tachometer. It tells you how fast the crankshaft is going. And when you leave this morning, go out and look at your tachometer. You'll see that when you go around on the dial on the tachometer, that when you get to about 3,500 RPMs or so, depending on your automobile, when you get to the upper limits of the tachometer, the numbers are red. They go from being black or white to being red numbers. And there's a reason for that. The tachometer measures how many revolutions per minute the crankshaft is going. And once you get up to the red numbers, it's called redlining your engine. So let me explain this. You can do a little experiment this afternoon if you want to. Take your car out on the highway, or you can even do this on Coit or Parker if you'll put it in second or third gear. And run your engine up to where you're redlining your engine, where the tachometer needle is over into the red numbers. Some of you won't do this because you know not to do it. The rest of you won't do it either because you will be able to tell by the sound of your engine that you're doing something horrible to it. When you redline your engine, you're running the crankshaft so fast that you're liable to blow up your engine. You'll stress the parts so much it won't be able to continue going. Our hospitals are full of people who have redlined their lives, aren't they? How much faster can you go? Well, in recent years, I've become fascinated by the story of Jesus. And by that I mean just reading the story of Jesus in the simplest of terms. And so, for instance, when you open the Gospel of Mark, you can do the same thing with Luke. You don't have to read very many pages at all into the Gospels to learn about the lifestyle of Jesus. From the moment he arose from the waters of the Jordan, the water dripping from him, John the Baptist baptizing him, from that moment on, his life was extraordinary. And he went at 90 miles an hour. He became, from that moment on, a kind of rock star, if you will, a spiritual rock star. And people were constantly pressing in on Jesus. Doesn't make any difference which gospel you read. You'll see that he was healing people and people were pressing in on him. This story, he's in a house and the whole city surrounds the house. People constantly wanting more and more and more from Jesus. And you wonder, how did he do it? How did he do it? Except when you read carefully, you will discover that there was a kind of rhythm to his life. He would go and go and go and go, and then he would stop. You saw it in this text this morning. People surrounding him, pulling on him, asking things of him all day long, but then he departs and goes to a lonely place, usually to the lakeside or to the top of the hill, usually early in the morning. And he spends time alone with God. You can call it go, 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 and stop. I really prefer to think of it as stop and go. Because I don't think Jesus went until he was tired and then he just had to stop. I think Jesus stopped so that he could be filled with God's energy so that he could go. He believed in going. He was probably a type A personality. He believed in going, but he first renewed himself spiritually, renewed his energy by spending time with God. And I think it is just one of the necessary pieces. It is a linchpin to understanding this remarkable person that we call Jesus. It was the spiritual discipline that he had of spending time with God that enabled him to do everything else, aligning his resources with God's resources and plans. So let me suggest two things this morning. This is really a simple sermon. You'll be able to remember this. Two things. First of all, that we use the season of Lent as an invitation to practice in a disciplined way the spiritual art of prayer. That we just simply use the 40 days to pray every single day. And through the years, I've done all sorts of experimentation with prayer. I've read books about prayer. I know that a lot of you struggle with prayer because I do as well. Prayer is not something that comes naturally to all of us. There are some people for whom the discipline of prayer is a spiritual gift. They're called contemplatives. I want you to see this definition up here. I think I used this word in my column this past week. Here we go. The contemplative, when you use it as a noun, a contemplative is a person marked by or given to contemplation, specifically relating to a religious order or devoted to prayer and penance. So used as a noun, a contemplative is a person who spends lots of time devoted to prayer and meditation. There are certain religious orders where they do spend their entire lives devoted to prayer and meditation. I don't know about you. I'm not a contemplative at all. I'm more of a doer. But one day I was thinking about this, and I don't know how it came to me, but all of a sudden I thought about the definition of mathematician. You know what a mathematician is, so we're not going to put that definition up there. But if you were to put up there the definition of a mathematician, a handful of you, maybe 5 or 6 of you, could raise your hands and say, yes, I'm a mathematician. But the rest of us would freely admit that we are not mathematicians. I mentioned earlier today that we're hiring a new president at my university, Southwestern University in Georgetown, and one of the candidates is a PhD mathematician. And I was reading his curriculum vitae, and I was looking at his scholarly articles. He's an expert in number theory, whatever that is. And I couldn't even understand the titles of the scholarly articles. It was totally abstract to me. And so I know that I'm not a mathematician. Most of you know that you're not a mathematician. But isn't it true that you use the skills of a mathematician every single day? I mean, you use the skills of a mathematician to balance your checkbook, to figure out how many miles per gallon you're getting on your car, or to add up the receipt to make sure it turns out right. You use those skills every day. In fact, for the most part, you have to use those skills in order to get through the day. So you don't have to be a mathematician to practice the skills of mathematics. And I would say to you that you don't have to be a contemplative in order to practice the skills of a contemplative. And that, in fact, we need to practice those as much as we need to practice the skills of mathematics. So this is really simple. Just pray every single day. And what I would say to you after 40 years of discussing this and reading about it and practicing it myself is that there is no way to go wrong when you pray. There's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's no way to go wrong. Prayer is nothing more than conversation with God. So when you pray, just think about having conversation with God. What would that conversation look like? Alex and I were talking between services. I know a lot of people feel guilty because when they start praying, they start asking God for things. What's wrong with that? The Bible tells you, read the New Testament, it tells you it's okay to ask God for things in prayer. Every time you pray, we know that one thing will always happen and a second thing might happen. Every time you pray, we know that it will change you, and it might change the outward circumstances of your life. And so just ask for what you want. Our younger son Joshua I think he's 31 years old. When he was 4 or 5 years old, I think it was a Christmas present. He got I guess it's a puppet of some kind called Teddy Ruxpin. Do you remember Teddy Ruxpin? Some of y'all remember Teddy Ruxpin. I don't remember for sure. Teddy Ruxpin could talk. I don't remember for sure. I think you had to pull a string and he would talk. That was really, these days they kind of talk on their own. I know robots or something. I don't know how they do that, but we've got toys in our house and you just walk by and they start talking to you. You know, they scare the daylights out of me sometimes. But Teddy Ruxpin, I think you had to pull a string or something, but that was really an advanced toy back in those days. And so Josh had this little toy called Teddy Ruxpin, and he loved Teddy Ruxpin. He was 4 or 5 years old. We were teaching him how to pray. He'd learned how to say the Lord's Prayer and so forth. I went by his room one night after he'd gone to bed, and I heard him in his room, and he was praying. He was saying, "Dear God, please make Teddy Ruxpin really talk." He wanted Teddy Ruxpin to talk without pulling the string. He wanted to be able to talk to Teddy Ruxpin. That was okay, wasn't it? Every time you pray, it changes you. It may change the outward. God didn't answer that prayer. As far as I know, Teddy Ruxpin never started talking spontaneously to Josh. But I love the fact that he was learning to have a conversation with God. So just try this every single day at the same time in a disciplined way. Have a conversation with God. And it's okay to ask God for the things that are important to you. Maybe as you continue to pray, you will become more sophisticated, or maybe that's not a good word, maybe deeper, more sensitive in your prayer life. So that you're not just asking about the things that are important to you, but you're asking about the kinds of things that Alexander preached about last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. That you're talking to God about maybe the fact that there are children who are hungry in this world. Maybe in your prayer time, in addition to asking about things that are important to you, you may be thinking about areas of the world where there is violence, where there is abuse, where there is injustice. Maybe you could just have a conversation with God and say, "God, I'm going to make a few comments here, and I invite you to lead us along in a little bit of a dialogue." I don't think you can go wrong with prayer as long as you practice it in a disciplined way every single day. So that's the first suggestion for this season of Lent, and that is to pray every single day. The second suggestion is to spend at least 7 minutes of silence every single day. This is what we are referring to as the gift of 7. There is research that tells us that it takes 7 minutes for us to become settled. It's really simple. You spend 7 minutes talking to God, that's your chance to work on God. And you spend 7 minutes in silence, that's God's chance to work on you. So you can think about this any way you want to. You can think about it in terms of Easter mysticism. You can listen to your breath if you want to. Pay attention to your breath. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. But if you'll give God 7 minutes of silence every single day to to work on you, I believe that it ultimately will change your life if you do it every day in a disciplined way. Here's what we're learning about how the brain works. We used to believe that the brain, once the child became an adult, around 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, the brain stopped changing. That the brain, this is what we knew 20 years ago, that the brain of the child is malleable. It changes, it's mushy, and it's constantly changing. But that when a person becomes an adult, it becomes hardwired. So the brain of a child is soft-wired, the brain of an adult is hardwired. The newest finding in neuroscience over the last 20 years, I do a little bit of light reading in this area. The most important finding in neuroscience is called neuroplasticity. And it is a stunning and extraordinarily important discovery. And it is that the brain is malleable, plastic, all the way up into old age. We've discovered this about the brain because of these remarkable new scanning techniques we have. I'll just give you one example. You can hook up a lot of people to a PET scanner and have them play a simulated game of slots or blackjack. And the PET scanner will show the parts of the brain that are lighting up at different times during the game. And what they've discovered is that the person who is addicted to gambling, their brain will light up in different places and in different ways from everybody else. And so there's all this scanning, we've learned that in fact you can change the neural pathways of the brain. So when you spend time in silence, you're giving God an opportunity to rewire your brain. You spend 7 minutes working on God, give God 7 minutes a day to work on you. It literally can change your life. So let's think about those issues that you deal with, that I deal with. Anger, sadness, depression, anxiety, that's mine. Addiction, passivity. I named yours at some point there, didn't I? If you give God an opportunity to rewire your brain, you can literally change your life. This is what I think Jesus knew that nobody else knew. Without the science, I think Jesus somehow knew that if he spent time alone with God every day, God would have the opportunity to align his thoughts, his beliefs, his actions with God's. It was the secret to the remarkable, vital life of Jesus. He spent time alone with God and allowed God to literally mold his life. So let's just try it as an experiment for 40 days maybe. I figured this up. If you were to spend 7 minutes in silence every single day for 40 days, you will have given God 4.5 hours to change your brain. We know that Jesus, when he went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, tempted by Satan, that when he left the desert as a different human being. Stronger, kinder, more compassionate, more graceful, more loving. I wonder if this could happen. If you and I could give God 7 minutes every day for 40 days and 40 nights and emerge from that time as different human beings. Stronger, more compassionate, more graceful, more loving.